Chapter 1. The Clockmaker's Last Customer. The rain fell in a fine mist over the narrow London street, softening the glow of the gas lamps and giving the cobbled road an almost spectral shimmer. The sign above the small, well-kept shop read Belmont, Clocks and Timepieces, its gilded letters barely gleaming through the drizzle. Inside, all was silence except for the quiet ticking of the many clocks that lined the walls, pendulums swinging in a ceaseless rhythm, as though marking the passage of time in a language only they understood. It was a small shop, but one of undeniable quality, known to collectors and connoisseurs who prized craftsmanship over mere function. Behind the counter, Mr. Percival Belmont, a man of nearly 70 with a solemn face and a neat silvered beard, stood inspecting the innards of an antique French carriage clock. His hands were steady despite his age, his thin-rimmed spectacles perched precisely on the bridge of his nose. He was a man of precision, both in his work and his life. Those who had done business with him spoke of his unwavering honesty and quiet dignity, though some whispered that he was too much of a recluse, keeping his secrets locked away as tightly as the delicate mechanisms of his timepieces. The bell above the door chimed, and Belmont did not look up at first, so absorbed was he in his work. But when the sound of approaching footsteps reached his ears, he sighed and placed the delicate tools aside. Business had slowed in recent years, and it was rare to have a visitor at such an hour. "Good evening," he said without looking up. "How may I help you?" A tall figure loomed before him, casting a long shadow across the counter. Belmont finally raised his eyes and took in the man before him, a gentleman, well dressed, though his greatcoat was damp from the rain. His face was obscured slightly by the dim light, but there was something about his presence that sent an uneasy shiver through the elderly clockmaker. "You are Mr. Belmont?" the man asked in a voice both deep and measured. "I am." Belmont wiped his hands on a cloth and folded them neatly before him. "And you are?" The stranger did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, ornately carved wooden box, which he placed upon the counter with deliberate care. The box itself was beautifully made, inlaid with ivory, and had a brass clasp securing its lid. "I have something for you," the man said at last. "A gift, if you will." Belmont frowned. "I do not accept gifts from strangers." "This is not an ordinary gift, Mr. Belmont," the man continued, his tone smooth, persuasive. "It is a piece of history, something that belongs to you." Cold sensation settled in Belmont's stomach. He hesitated, then reached for the box, his fingers tracing the intricate designs on the lid. Something about it felt familiar. Slowly, he unfastened the clasp and opened it. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a pocket watch, its surface tarnished with age, but the craftsmanship unmistakable. Belmont inhaled sharply. He recognized this watch. He had not seen it in nearly 40 years, yet he could never forget it. "Where did you get this?" he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. The man smiled faintly. "You know where." For a long moment there was silence, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the clocks surrounding them. Belmont's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the watch, his eyes tracing its delicate engravings. "This should not exist," he muttered. "And yet here it is." Belmont looked up sharply. What do you want from me?" The man leaned, in slightly, his expression unreadable. "The truth." At that moment the shop bell rang again, but this time it was not the sound of an entering customer. It was a sharp, discordant clang, the result of a sudden gust of wind forcing the door wide open. The candlelight flickered violently, and the stranger turned his head toward the entrance. In that brief second of distraction, Belmont felt an overwhelming sense of danger, an instinct honed over decades of cautious living. He reached under the counter for something, what even he was unsure of, a weapon, a means of defense, anything. But when he looked up again, the stranger was gone. The door stood open, the rain glistening on the threshold, and outside the street was empty. Only the wooden box and the old pocket watch remained. Belmont's heart pounded in his chest. He turned the watch over, pressing a small hidden latch he had not dared touch in decades. The back panel opened, revealing a delicate inscription, "For P.B., a debt repaid in time." He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. With great care, he placed the watch back into its velvet case and locked the shop door. He did not know who the stranger was, nor how he had come into possession of this relic from the past, but he knew, with chilling certainty, that he had not seen the last of him. That night, Belmont clocks and timepieces remained closed. The next morning, when the shop's only assistant, young Thomas Barlow, arrived at his usual hour, he found the door locked and no sign of Mr. Belmont. When he peered through the window, all seemed in order. The clocks continued their steady ticking. The counters were neat, and yet there was something eerie about the silence of the place. After knocking several times to no response, Thomas made his way to the back entrance, which was often left open for deliveries. To his relief, the door gave way easily. "Mr. Belmont!" he called as he stepped inside. No answer as he moved through the workshop. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, and then he saw it. The figure slumped over the main counter, motionless. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. He hurried forward, his boots clacking on the wooden floor. "Mr. Belmont?" He tried again, but he already knew. Percival Belmont was dead. His body lay across the counter as though he had collapsed suddenly. His right hand clutched something tightly, something that glinted faintly in the morning light, the old pocket watch. But the strangest thing of all, Thomas would later tell the authorities, was the fact that not a single clock in the shop had stopped ticking, all except one. The grand mahogany wall clock, the pride of Belmont's collection, had frozen at precisely 12:07, a time that meant nothing, and yet it would soon mean everything. Chapter 2. The time of death. The police arrived at Belmont Clocks and Timepieces promptly at 9 o'clock that morning, summoned by a pale and shaken Thomas Barlow. The young man had barely managed to keep his composure as he stumbled into the station, his words tumbling out in frantic gasps. A constable had accompanied him back to the shop, taken one look at the still form of Percival Belmont slumped across the counter, and immediately sent for a detective. Inspector Harold Flint was a man of few words and a great deal of experience. With over 2 decades on the force, he had seen all manner of unnatural deaths, from the crude work of common brutes to the carefully staged accidents of those who killed with cold calculation. As he stepped into the clockmaker's shop, His keen grey eyes swept across the scene with practised efficiency. The corpse of Percival Belmont remained precisely as young Thomas had found it. His upper body sprawled over the polished counter, his head resting at an awkward angle. His right hand remained curled around the pocket watch, his grip so tight that it took considerable effort to pry his fingers open. Flint exhaled sharply as he examined the scene. Death, he had learned, always left a signature. And something about this one felt off. Dr. Oliver Rowe, the police surgeon, arrived shortly after, his medical bag swinging at his side. He was a short man with a perpetually harried expression, as if constantly running late for an appointment only he knew about. Without wasting time on pleasantries, he approached the body and began his examination. "No sign of a struggle," Rowe muttered as he checked the hands and arms for bruising. "No obvious wounds. Rigor mortis has begun to set in, but not fully. I'd estimate time of death between midnight and 2 o'clock this morning." Inspector Flint turned to Thomas. "You said the door was locked when you arrived?" "Yes, sir," Thomas replied, his voice still unsteady. "It was locked as usual. I had to use the back entrance." Flint nodded, and nothing else seemed out of place. No sign of forced entry? "No, sir. Everything was exactly as Mr. Belmont left it last night." The inspector's gaze swept over the shop once more. The meticulous order of the space suggested a man of strict habits. Nothing was overturned, no shattered glass, no papers strewn about in a struggle. And yet Belmont was dead. Rowe turned his attention to the pocket watch, now resting on the counter where Flint had placed it. He flipped it open and frowned. "This watch has stopped at 12:07, he noted. "Could be a coincidence, or it could be the exact time of death." Flint considered this. It wasn't unheard of for timepieces to halt at the moment of their owner's passing, especially if they were dropped or struck at that precise instant. But something about the way Belmont clutched this watch suggested it had been important to him, perhaps more than a mere keepsake. "We'll send the body for a full post-mortem," Rowe said, straightening up. "But if you ask me, I'd wager it was the heart. Man his age, shock or stress could have done it. Of course, I'll confirm once I've had a proper look." Flint grunted in acknowledgement, but his instincts told him not to take anything at face value just yet. A constable entered the shop, tipping his hat respectfully. "Sir, a gentleman is here to see you. Says he may be of assistance." Flint arched an eyebrow. "Who is he?" "Says his name is Hercule Poirot." The name was unfamiliar to Flint, but he nodded for the man to be shown in. Moments later, a small, impeccably dressed figure stepped into the shop, carefully adjusting his gloves. His moustache was neatly waxed, his posture upright, and his eyes, sharp, observant, took in the scene with unmistakable interest. "Monsieur," he greeted in a clipped Belgian accent, inclining his head politely. "I hope you will forgive my intrusion, but I could not help but hear that an unfortunate incident has occurred." Flint folded his arms, studying him. "And you are?" "Hercule Poirot, at your service," the man replied with a slight bow. "It is my profession to observe, to deduce, and when necessary, to uncover the truth." The introduction was delivered with quiet confidence, yet without arrogance. There was something about this man, something methodical, precise. "What ho! brings you here, Mr. Poirot?" Flint asked cautiously. Poirot spread his hands. "I was acquainted with Monsieur Belmont many years ago. Not closely, you understand, but enough to recognize the name when I happened to pass by this morning and see a small crowd forming." He moved closer to the body, but did not touch. Instead, he studied the position of the hands, the expression frozen on Belmont's face, the curious detail of the pocket watch. "This watch, Inspector," Poirot murmured. "It stopped at 12:07, yes?" Flint nodded. Poirot tapped his fingertips together. "And yet you do not find this peculiar?" "It could be the time of death," Flint offered. "Or," Poirot countered, "it could be what we are meant to believe is the time of death." Flint frowned, but Poirot continued before he could protest. "Tell me, Inspector, have you noticed the dust?" Flint glanced around. "What about it?" Poirot stepped carefully behind the counter, his gaze fixed on the floor. Monsieur Belmont was a man of routine, yes? A craftsman precise in all things? Thomas, still hovering nervously in the background, nodded. "Yes, sir. He kept everything in perfect order." Poirot gestured toward the counter where Belmont had collapsed. "And yet, look here. There is a space where the dust is disturbed. A small space, as if something once rested there but has been removed." Flint leaned in, following Poirot's indication. Now that he looked closely, he could see it. A faint outline, suggesting something had indeed been placed there for some time before being taken away. A clock, perhaps, Poirot mused. But not just any clock, one large enough to leave such a mark. Flint's frown deepened. "You think something was stolen?" "Perhaps." Poirot straightened, his eyes glinting with keen interest. "Or perhaps it was silenced." Flint exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't sure yet whether this Poirot was onto something, or merely indulging in dramatic speculation. But his instinct told him to listen. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "Tell me, mon cher inspecteur, did Monsieur Belmont have enemies?" Thomas hesitated, then answered, "Not that I know of. He was a private man, kept to himself." Poirot nodded, but there was something unreadable in his expression. "This death," he murmured, "it is not natural, I think. No, there is something here, something carefully hidden, waiting to be uncovered." Inspector Flint sighed. He had a feeling this case was about to become far more complicated than he had anticipated, and he had an even stronger feeling that Hercule Poirot would not be leaving until he had solved the mystery of Percival Belmont's death. Chapter 3. A clock gone. Missing. Inspector Flint had dealt with his fair share of amateur sleuths and self-proclaimed experts. But there was something different about Hercule Poirot. The Belgian detective exuded a quiet confidence, a certainty that suggested he was already beginning to unravel the mystery before them. Flint was not a man to dismiss expertise, and so he watched as Poirot moved around the shop with deliberate precision, his keen eyes taking in details that others might overlook. The shop itself was a picture of meticulous order. Rows upon rows of timepieces lined the shelves, from delicate pocket watches to grand mantel clocks. Each seemed perfectly in its place, as if Percival Belmont had arranged them with obsessive care before his untimely demise. And yet Poirot had already noted something amiss. A space, a small absence in the layer of dust on the counter, suggesting that a clock had been there and was now gone. Poirot turned to young Thomas Barlow, his expression thoughtful. "Mon ami, tell me, was there a clock kept on this counter? A larger one, perhaps?" Thomas frowned, stepping closer. "Yes, actually. Mr. Belmont had a habit of keeping one particular clock here, a rather beautiful piece, brass casing, finely engraved. He always said it was special, though he never told me why." Poirot's dark eyes sharpened. "And this clock, it is no longer here." "No, sir," Thomas said hesitantly, glancing at the empty space Poirot had indicated. "Now that you mention it, it should be there. Mr. Belmont never moved it." Flint rubbed his chin. "Could someone have stolen it?" Poirot considered the question carefully, before shaking his head. "Perhaps, but let us not assume too quickly. A theft, yes, it is possible, but there are other possibilities, are there not?" He turned back to the inspector. "Monsieur Belmont, he was found clutching a pocket-watch, was he not?" Lintia nodded, "tightly enough that we had to pry it from his hand." Poirot gestured to the counter, and yet there was a larger clock here. "Is it not curious, Inspector, that he did not clutch that? If one were dying and wished to convey a message, would one not choose the most obvious object at hand?" Flint exhaled through his nose. "Unless someone took it from him." "Just so," Poirot murmured, "or unless it played a role in his death." Thomas made a small nervous noise at the back of his throat. You think the missing clock might be the key to what happened?" Poirot smiled faintly. "I think, mon cher, that when a clock vanishes in a shop full of timepieces, one must ask why." Flint, accustomed to working with facts rather than riddles, folded his arms. "Let's go back to something more solid. You knew Mr. Belmont years ago, did you not?" "Yes," Poirot acknowledged. "We crossed paths in a matter most curious. It was some years ago. But that is a story for another time. What matters is that I remember him as a man who valued precision above all things. And yet here, he lies dead in his own shop, clutching a watch stopped at the 12:07. The watch he held tightly. The missing clock removed. These are not coincidences, mon cher Inspector." Flint grunted. "So we need to find out who might have wanted that clock, or why it was removed at all." Poirot inclined his head. "Exactement. And as always, we must begin with those closest to the deceased." Thomas Barlow looked stricken. You don't mean me, do you?" Poirot's expression softened. "Non, mon ami, I do not accuse. But you worked with Monsieur Belmont, n'est-ce pas? You know who his customers were, his habits, his business dealings. That makes you invaluable to our inquiry." Thomas swallowed, nodding. I'll tell you anything I can." "Bon," Poirot said approvingly. "Then tell me, who has visited the shop in recent days? Was there anyone who seemed uneasy? Anyone who spoke of this clock in particular?" Thomas furrowed his brow in concentration. There were always customers, of course, people coming in to buy, to repair, but... He hesitated. "Yes?" Poirot encouraged. "There was someone," Thomas admitted. "A gentleman came in 2 days ago, said he wanted to buy the brass clock. Mr. Belmont refused. He said it wasn't for sale." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Did he give a reason?" Thomas shook his head. "No, sir. He just said it was special, to him and that he wouldn't part with it. Flint interjected. This man who wanted to buy it. Do you remember his name? I do, Thomas said, his voice hushed, as if the name itself carried weight. Mr. Felix Grantham. Poirot's expression remained unreadable, but there was a shift in his posture, a subtle tension, as if the name meant something to him. And did Monsieur Belmont seem uneasy after this visit? Poirot asked. Thomas hesitated before nodding. Yes, more than uneasy. I found him pacing that night after we closed. He kept looking at the brass clock as if it troubled him. Poirot exhaled softly. Ah, and you say this Monsieur Grantham? He was insistent. He was, Thomas confirmed, almost desperate. Flint exchanged a glance with Poirot. Sounds like a man worth speaking to. Indeed, Poirot murmured, but let us not forget, mon cher inspector, whoever took the clock, if they did take it, they would have needed to enter the shop. And if young Thomas speaks truly, the doors were locked this morning. Flint stiffened. Are you suggesting the culprit had a key? Or, Poirot said thoughtfully, that the clock was taken before Monsieur Belmont died. A silence fell over the shop, the ticking of the remaining clocks suddenly deafening. Inspector, Poirot said at last, his voice gentle but firm, I believe it is time we spoke to Monsieur Grantham. Flint nodded grimly. Agreed. Let's see what he has to say about all this. Poirot gave a small smile, but there was a gleam in his eye, one that suggested he was already several steps ahead. For Hercule Poirot, the game had truly begun. Chapter 4. The man who wanted the clock Felix Grantham lived in a modest yet respectable townhouse on the outskirts of London. The kind of place one might expect of a man who had known wealth, but had learned, through some misfortune or another, how to live without excess. It was dusk when Poirot and Inspector Flint arrived at his doorstep, the gaslights flickering in the street as a damp mist curled through the air. Flint knocked firmly. They waited, and after a moment the door was opened by a thin, nervous-looking man in his late 50s. He had the air of someone who had once been robust, but had since been hollowed out by time or worry. His pale blue eyes flicked between them warily. "Mr. Grantham?" Flint asked. "Yes." The man's voice was cautious. "I am Inspector Flint, of Scotland Yard, and this is Hercule Poirot." Grantham's gaze settled on the Belgian detective, his expression shifting to one of reluctant recognition. "I know of you." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "I am flattered, monsieur." "May we come in?" Flint asked, his tone firm but not unfriendly. Grantham hesitated, then stepped aside. "I suppose I have no choice, do I?" Poirot and Flint entered a sitting-room lined with bookshelves. The air carried the scent of old paper, tobacco, and something else, something faintly metallic, like the lingering trace of oil on clockwork. A small fire burned in the grate, casting flickering shadows against the walls. Grantham gestured for them to sit, but he himself remained standing. He folded his arms, his fingers drumming against his sleeves. "What is this about?" Poirot observed him carefully before speaking. "You were at the shop of Monsieur Belmont 2 days ago, were you not?" Grantham blinked, but did not immediately respond. "And if I was?" "You wished to purchase a particular clock." Now there was the slightest flicker of something. Surprise? Annoyance? Grantham covered it quickly. Yes, I did. He refused to sell it. Is that a crime? No, Poirot said mildly. But murder is. Grantham's body tensed. Murder? Flint leaned forward. Percival Belmont was found dead in his shop this morning. There was a long silence. Grantham's expression remained unreadable, but his hands twitched at his sides. And you think I had something to do with it? We do not think, Poirot said smoothly. We ask. Grantham exhaled sharply and moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames. I had no quarrel with Belmont. Yet you wanted that clock, Flint pointed out. Why? Grantham turned back to them, his pale blue eyes sharp. Because it belonged to my father. That, Poirot noted, was not the answer he had been expecting. Your father? Flint echoed. Grantham nodded. The clock in question was once part of my family's possessions. Many years ago, after my father died, my mother was forced to sell off various items to settle debts. That clock was among them. It was unique. You see, brass casing, finely engraved, unlike any other. My father had cherished it. I recognized it the moment I saw it in Belmont's shop. Poirot tapped a finger against his knee. And when you asked to buy it, he refused? Grantham's jaw tightened. Yes, said it wasn't for sale. Did he give a reason? Grantham hesitated. No, just that he wouldn't part with it. Did you argue? No, Grantham said quickly. Too quickly. Flint narrowed his eyes. Are you sure about that, sir? Grantham exhaled through his nose. We had words, but nothing more. I was frustrated, but I left. I didn't see him again. Poirot studied him, his fingers steepled together. And yet, Monsieur Grantham, you seem remarkably ill at ease. Grantham's fingers twitched again. A man I spoke to 2 days ago has just been murdered. I believe I have a right to feel uneasy. Did you know Mr. Belmont personally? Flint asked. Grantham hesitated again. A second too long. Not well. Poirot's gaze sharpened. But you did know him. Grantham's lips thinned. Yes, years ago. We had mutual acquaintances. Acquaintances or business? Poirot's voice was soft, but there was an edge to it. Grantham's hands clenched into fists before he forced them to relax. It was a long time ago. And yet, Monsieur Belmont refused to sell you a clock that, by all rights, was once your father's. Poirot murmured. It is curious, n'est-ce pas? Grantham's expression darkened. What are you implying? Poirot spread his hands. I imply nothing, monsieur. I only seek to understand. Did Monsieur Belmont have reason to dislike you? Grantham stiffened. Then, after a long moment, he exhaled. Belmont and I, we had a past. Flint leaned forward. What kind of past? Grantham turned back to the fire, his face unreadable. Years ago, before Belmont became a clockmaker, he was involved in, let us say, certain dealings. I was part of that world too. But I left it behind. I rebuilt my life. Belmont did the same, or so I thought. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. And yet, when you saw him again, he refused to part with something that had once belonged to your family. Grantham's jaw worked. I don't know why he refused. Perhaps he wanted to spite me. Perhaps he simply valued the clock, but I swear to you, I had nothing to do with his death." Poirot was silent for a moment, then inclined his head. "Merci, Monsieur Grantham. Your honesty is appreciated." Grantham gave a short, humourless laugh. "Honesty? Yes." Flint stood. "We may have more questions, Mr. Grantham. Don't leave town." Grantham gave a small, tired nod. "I have nowhere to go." As Poirot and Flint stepped out into the misty evening air, Flint exhaled. "What do you make of him?" Poirot was quiet for a moment, then said, "He lies." Flint's brow furrowed. "About killing Belmont?" Poirot shook his head. "No, but about something." Flint frowned. "The clock? Perhaps," Poirot murmured. "Or perhaps about the past he shared with Belmont. One thing is certain, mon cher, this murder. It is not merely about a clock. There is something deeper." Flint sighed. "So what's our next move?" Poirot straightened his cuffs. "We must learn more about the past of Monsieur Belmont. And, mon ami, we must find that missing clock." The streetlights flickered as they walked into the night, the mystery deepening with each step. Chapter 5. The Missing Clock. The following morning found Hercule Poirot seated in his favourite chair at the Savoy Hotel, his hands resting lightly on the arms as he contemplated the events of the previous day. A light breakfast of buttered toast and coffee sat untouched on the table before him, his mind far too preoccupied to concern itself with such earthly pleasures. Across from him, Inspector Flint shifted restlessly in his seat, his fingers drumming against the armrest. "So, where does that leave us?" Flint asked. Felix Grantham had a clear motive for wanting the clock, but he claims he didn't kill Belmont. Do you believe him? Poirot sighed and delicately adjusted the cuffs of his immaculately pressed suit. "I believe, mon cher, that Monsieur Grantham has not been entirely forthcoming. He conceals something. But what, I cannot yet say." "The clock," Flint muttered. "It all comes back to that cursed clock. And yet, when we searched Belmont's shop, it was nowhere to be found." "Exactement," Poirot agreed. "And that, you see, is most intriguing." Flint frowned. "Meaning?" Poirot leaned forward, his sharp gaze locking onto the inspector's. "Meaning, mon ami, that if the clock were of no consequence, it would still be in the shop. But it is missing. And what does that tell us?" "That someone took it," Flint said slowly. "Précisément. But who? And why?" Poirot tapped a finger against his temple. If Monsieur Grantham is to be believed, Belmont had no intention of selling the clock. But now, after his death, it has disappeared. So we must ask ourselves, who would benefit from its absence? Flint exhaled heavily and leaned back in his chair. Maybe whoever killed Belmont took it. Could be the same person. Poirot's lips curled slightly. "A reasonable assumption, mon ami. And yet, it does not satisfy me. Why not?" "Because, Inspector, if the murderer took the clock, that suggests the crime was premeditated. And yet the manner of Belmont's death suggests an act of impulse. A struggle. A crime of passion, perhaps. But not one meticulously planned." Flint shook his head. "So you think someone else might have taken it after the murder?" "C'est possible. But then we must ask, who had the opportunity? The body was discovered early in the morning, but when exactly did the crime take place? And who entered the shop before the police arrived? Flint rubbed his jaw. That old woman, Mrs. Winthrop. She was the one who found him. Ah, woo, the unfortunate Mrs. Winthrop. Poirot steepled his fingers. It is most curious, is it not? She came, she says, to pick up a repaired timepiece. But when she entered, she found only death. Now tell me, Inspector, do we know for certain that she did not take the clock? Flint blinked. You think an elderly woman might have stolen it? Poirot spread his hands. I think that we must consider every possibility. Flint sighed. Fine. I'll have a word with her. Poirot smiled. Excellent. And while you do that, I shall make inquiries of my own. Flint narrowed his eyes. Where? Poirot's expression was unreadable. To the past, mon cher, for I suspect that the answer to this mystery lies not in the present, but in what came before. Mrs. Winthrop, as it turned out, was not difficult to find. A widow of many years, she lived in a modest little house just a few streets away from Belmont's shop. When Flint knocked on her door, she greeted him with wide, anxious eyes. "Oh, Inspector, have you found anything? Such a dreadful business, truly dreadful." Flint cleared his throat. "Mrs. Winthrop, I need to ask you a few more questions." The old woman nodded vigorously and ushered him inside. The sitting room was cramped but tidy, filled with porcelain figurines and lace doilies. A tall grandfather clock stood in the corner, ticking softly. "I told you everything I know," she said, wringing her hands. "I simply went to pick up my watch, and when I arrived, poor Mr. Belmont was, yes, Flint said impatiently. "But I need you to think carefully. When you entered the shop, was anything out of place?" Mrs. Winthrop frowned. I don't know. The whole place was in such a state. Things knocked over, glass broken." She shuddered. "It was terrible." Flint studied her carefully. "Did you notice a brass clock, about this size?" He gestured with his hands. Mrs. Winthrop blinked. "A brass clock? No, I don't think so, but then I wasn't exactly looking for one." Flint sighed. "You're sure?" "Quite sure, Inspector. But if you ask me—" She hesitated. Flint's eyes sharpened. "Yes?" She hesitated again, then said in a hushed voice, "There was someone else there before me." Flint stiffened. "What?" "I didn't see them, but as I was walking down the street, I could have sworn I saw someone leaving the shop. A shadowy figure, moving quickly." Flint's pulse quickened. "Did you see who it was?" Mrs. Winthrop shook her head. "No, it was too dark. But I had the strangest feeling that whoever it was, they didn't want to be seen." Flint cursed under his breath. "And you didn't think to mention this before?" Mrs. Winthrop looked, distressed. "I didn't realize it was important. I thought maybe it was just a trick of the light." Flint exhaled sharply. "Thank you, Mrs. Winthrop. You've been very helpful." Meanwhile, Poirot was conducting his own inquiries. He had returned to the shop, this time with a particular purpose in mind. He moved carefully through the space, his keen eyes scanning every surface. Then, after a moment, he stopped. There, a faint indentation in the dust where something had once rested. A clock, perhaps. Poirot reached out and lightly touched the surface. Then he smiled. "Ah," he murmured, "now we are getting somewhere." As he straightened, He heard the door open behind him. He turned to see Inspector Flint enter, his face dark with frustration. Mrs. Winthrop saw someone leaving the shop before she arrived. Flint said grimly. Poirot's expression did not change. Ah, then it seems, mon ami, that we are not the only ones searching for this elusive clock. Flint scowled. Whoever it was, they must have taken it. Poirot smiled. Indeed. And now, my dear Inspector, we must ask ourselves, who had reason to take the clock, yet did not wish to be seen? Flint exhaled. That's what we have to find out. Poirot adjusted his cuffs. And find out we shall, mon cher. But first, let us consider this. If the murderer is not the same person who took the clock, then what does that tell us? Flint frowned. That the clock wasn't the motive for the murder. Poirot nodded. Précisément. Flint's face darkened, which means we still don't know why Belmont was killed. Poirot smiled, his eyes gleaming. Not yet, mon ami, but soon. Très bientôt. The mystery of the missing clock was deepening, and with it, so too was the mystery of Percival Belmont's murder. But Poirot, as always, had faith that the truth would soon reveal itself. After all, as he so often said, nothing remains hidden forever. Chapter 6. A Stranger in the Fog. The evening mist clung to the streets of London, swirling in ghostly tendrils around the flickering gas lamps. Hercule Poirot walked briskly through the damp air, his polished shoes tapping a precise rhythm against the cobblestones. Beside him, Inspector Flint had his coat collar turned up against the cold, his expression grim. "All right, Poirot, I'll bait," Flint muttered. "Where are we going?" Poirot adjusted his gloves with careful precision. "To seek the past, mon cher, and to find a man who does not wish to be found." Flint scowled. "We don't even know who we're looking for." "Ah, but we do," Poirot countered smoothly. "We know that a shadowy figure was seen leaving the shop before Mrs. Winthrop arrived, and we know that something was taken, something of great importance." Meho grumbled. "That still doesn't tell us who it was." Poirot stopped suddenly and turned to face the inspector, his sharp eyes gleaming. "Let us use our logic, mon ami. We have ruled out Felix Grantham, for he was detained at the time of the murder, and we can reasonably eliminate Mrs. Winthrop. An elderly woman would hardly have cause to steal the clock under such suspicious circumstances. So, who remains?" Flint considered the question. The assistant, Charles Evans, that shifty clerk. Poirot shook his head. No, Evans is an opportunist, oui, but not a killer. And certainly not a man who would risk stealing something under such conditions. No, Inspector, we are looking for someone with knowledge of the clock's significance. Someone with a reason to take it, and a reason to keep it hidden. Flint exhaled heavily. "And where do you propose we find such a person?" Poirot gave a small smile. "We shall begin with the place where all secrets are eventually revealed, mon ami. The underworld of London's collectors and dealers. The black market." Their search took them to a small, inconspicuous shop, tucked away in the maze of alleys behind Soho. A faded sign above the door read, "P. Catamole, Antiquities and Curios," though the grimy windows offered no view of what lay inside. Flint gave Poirot a sceptical look. "You think our mystery thief would come here?" Poirot's expression was unreadable. "We shall see." He pushed open the door, and a small bell tinkled overhead. Inside, the shop was cluttered with oddities, rows of ancient books, cabinets filled with dusty trinkets, and shelves stacked haphazardly with clocks, paintings, and statues. A single oil lamp cast a flickering glow over the space, illuminating the figure of a gaunt man behind the counter. Phineas Catamole was a man of indeterminate age, his skin parchment thin, his eyes deep-set and shadowed. He regarded Poirot and Flint with an expression of wary amusement. "Ah," he drawled, his voice like dry leaves rustling. "Inspector Flint and Hercule Poirot, if I'm not mistaken." Poirot inclined his head. "Très bien, Monsieur Catamole. You have an excellent memory." Catamole gave a humorless smile. "In my line of work, it pays to remember faces." His gaze sharpened. "What brings you to my humble establishment?" Poirot stepped forward, his hands neatly clasped behind his back. "A certain item has gone missing, Monsieur Catamole. A clock, brass, finely made. It belonged to a man named Percival Belmont." Catamole's expression did not change, but a faint flicker of recognition passed through his eyes. "Belmont," he repeated. "Yes, I knew of him. A fine craftsman." "A dead one," Flint said flatly. "He was murdered 2 nights ago." Catamole's face remained impassive. "A shame. But what has that to do with me?" Poirot leaned in slightly. "Monsieur, let us not waste time with pretense. You deal in rare objects, n'est-ce pas? And this clock, it was rare indeed, perhaps even valuable." Catamole studied Poirot for a long moment, then exhaled. "I don't have it." Flint took a step forward. "But you know who does, don't you?" The antiquarian hesitated. Then, finally, he spoke. "There was a man. Came by last night asking if I dealt in timepieces. He wouldn't give his name, but he was nervous, glancing over his shoulder as if he expected to be followed." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Describe him." Catamole frowned. "Tall, thin, wore a long coat. His hands shook slightly when he spoke. I got the impression he was desperate." Poirot exchanged a glance with Flint. "Where did he go?" the inspector asked. Catamole shook his head. "I don't know, but he asked me where he might find a buyer, someone discreet. And I sent him to a man called Langley, an old fence who deals in rare objects. If your man has the clock, Langley will know." Poirot nodded. "Merci, Monsieur Catamole. You have been most helpful." Catamole gave a dry chuckle. "Helpful, am I? You'll forgive me if I don't feel particularly reassured by that." It was nearing midnight when Poirot and Flint arrived at Langley's residence, a crumbling townhouse on the outskirts of the city. A single candle burned in the upstairs window, casting a weak glow against the fog. "This is a bad idea," Flint muttered. "Langley's dangerous, and if our man is here, he won't be alone." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Then we must tread carefully, mon ami." They climbed the steps, and Flint rapped sharply on the door. A long silence followed. Then at last the door creaked open a fraction, revealing a sliver of a face. "Who's there?" a gruff voice demanded. "Police," Flint said. "We're looking for someone." The door opened a little wider, revealing an unshaven man with suspicious eyes. "I don't know anything." Poirot smiled pleasantly. "Ah, but you see, Monsieur Langley, I believe that you do." Langley scowled. "What's this about?" Flint took a step forward. "A man came to you, didn't he? Tall, thin, looking to sell a brass clock." Langley hesitated. "Maybe. What's it to you?" Poirot's expression turned serious. "It is to us, monsieur, because the man who once owned that clock is dead. Murdered." Langley stiffened. "I don't want trouble." "Then tell us what you know," Flint said. Langley exhaled. "All right. He came to me, all right. Said he needed money, fast. I told him I wasn't interested. I don't deal in things that might bring the police sniffing around. He left in a hurry." "Where did he go?" Poirot asked. Langley hesitated, then sighed. "There's a boarding house on the east side, the Red Lion Inn. He said he was staying there." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, excellent! You see, mon ami," he said. To Flint, step by step, the truth reveals itself. Flint adjusted his coat. "Then let's see if our mystery man is still there." As they stepped back into the foggy night, Poirot's mind whirled. The stolen clock was the key to everything. Of that he was certain. And now, at last, the man who had taken it was within reach. What secrets did he hold? Only time would tell. Chapter 7. The Man Who Feared Time. The Red Lion Inn stood at the edge of a quiet street, its once vibrant red paint faded and peeling. A flickering lantern above the entrance cast shifting shadows along the damp cobblestones. Poirot and Inspector Flint paused outside, taking in the stillness of the hour. The scent of rain lingered in the air, and somewhere in the distance a clock chimed softly, its sound strangely ominous in the hush of the night. "This is it," Flint muttered. "Let's hope our man hasn't bolted already." Poirot adjusted his gloves with meticulous precision. "If he has fled, mon ami, then we must ask ourselves why and where." Flint grunted and pushed open the heavy wooden door. Inside, the inn smelled of stale ale and damp wood, the air thick with the lingering scent of pipe smoke. A few weary travellers dozed in the corners, and behind the counter stood a portly man in a rumpled waistcoat, polishing a mug with the tired resignation of a man who had long since given up on finding a clean rag. He looked up as they approached, eyeing them warily. "Rooms are full," he grunted. Flint flashed his badge. "Not here for a room." The innkeeper's expression didn't change. "Then what do you want?" Poirot stepped forward with a polite smile. "We seek a guest of yours. A tall man, thin, wearing a long coat. He arrived last night, perhaps in some distress." The innkeeper scratched his stubbled chin, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Might be I remember someone like that." Flint sighed. "And might be you need an incentive." The man shrugged, utterly indifferent. Poirot, however, merely smiled and reached into his pocket, producing a crisp note, which he placed neatly on the counter. The innkeeper's fingers moved with remarkable speed, making the money disappear as though it had never existed. "Second floor," he said at last. "Room 7. Flint gave a sharp nod. "We'll need the key." The innkeeper smirked. "He didn't take one. Said he wouldn't be staying long." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, very telling indeed." The two men ascended the creaking staircase, their footsteps muffled by the worn carpet. At the far end of the dimly lit corridor, a door stood slightly ajar. Room 7. Flint reached for his revolver, but Poirot gently placed a hand on his arm. "Let us not alarm him, mon ami." Flint scowled but lowered his weapon. Carefully, Poirot nudged the door open. Inside, the room was sparsely furnished. A narrow bed, a rickety chair, a single candle flickering atop a wooden table. And in the far corner, hunched in the shadows, was a man. He was tall and gaunt, his clothes dishevelled, his eyes darting wildly as he stared at them. In his trembling hands he clutched something wrapped in a cloth bundle. Flint took a step forward. "You there! We need to talk!" The man shrank back. "I didn't do it," he whispered hoarsely. "I swear, I didn't kill him." Poirot's keen eyes missed nothing. The twitching fingers, the sheen of sweat on the man's brow, the way his gaze flickered toward the window as if gauging an escape. "Monsieur," Poirot said gently, "we do not yet know what you have or have not done, but we do know that you possess something of great importance." The man clutched the bundle tighter. "I don't know what you mean." Flint stepped forward, his patience wearing thin. "That clock, the one you stole from Belmont's shop. Hand it over." The man flinched as if struck. "I didn't steal it, He hesitated, then sagged against the wall, his body shuddering. "I had no choice." Poirot's voice was calm, but insistent. "Then tell us, mon ami, the truth, if you please." The man hesitated for a long moment. Then slowly, with trembling hands, he unwrapped the bundle. There, gleaming in the candlelight, was the missing clock, a beautifully crafted brass timepiece, its intricate design unmistakably the work of Percival Belmont. But there was something else, something neither Poirot nor Flint had anticipated. The glass face of the clock was shattered, and inside, where the delicate gears should have been, there was instead a hollow cavity. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Ah, now this is most intriguing." Flint frowned. "What the devil?" The man clutched the clock protectively. "I swear, I didn't know. I didn't know what was inside until I opened it." Poirot's gaze was piercing. "And what was inside, monsieur?" The man swallowed, hard. "Papers, documents, but not just any documents." He took a shaky breath. They were government files, confidential ones. Flint stiffened. "Government files?" The man nodded desperately. I was hired to retrieve the clock. That's all I knew. I thought it was just a valuable antique, but when I broke it open, I found the papers. I knew then that I'd been used." Poirot studied him thoughtfully. "And who hired you, mon ami?" The man hesitated, his gaze darting toward the door, as if he expected someone to burst in at any moment. "I can't say." Flint's patience snapped. "Like hell you can't." Poirot raised a hand. "Calm yourself, mon ami. This man is frightened, and rightly so. But he must understand. There is greater danger in silence than in truth." The man looked at Poirot, his lips pressed tightly together. Then, at last, he exhaled. "I don't know his real name," he admitted, "but I know what they call him, the Fox." Flint's expression darkened. "The Fox?" Poirot's face remained unreadable. "A most elusive name." The man nodded. "He's dangerous. If he knows I talked—" Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. "Then let us ensure that he does not know." The man hesitated, then slowly slid the broken clock across the table. Poirot picked it up, turning it carefully in his hands. His eyes gleamed as he studied the hollow compartment. "Ah," he murmured, "now we begin to understand." Flint looked at him sharply. "What are you thinking, Poirot?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Only that our dear Monsieur Belmont was not merely a humble clockmaker. He was something more." The man swallowed. "Then you believe me?" Poirot's gaze was unreadable. "I believe that you are in danger, monsieur, and so are we." Sudden noise from the corridor made them all freeze. A soft creak of a floorboard. Poirot's voice was barely above a whisper. "Mon ami, I do believe we have been followed." Flint's hand went to his gun, but Poirot raised a finger. "No, we must be clever." The tension in the room was palpable. Outside, the air was thick with silence, save for the faint, rhythmic ticking of an unseen clock. Poirot's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Time, mon ami," he murmured. "Time is running out." Chapter 8. The Fox in the Shadows. For a moment no one moved. The air in the small room was thick with tension, the only sound the faint tick of a clock in the hallway. Poirot turned his head slightly, listening intently. Another creak. Someone was just outside the door. Inspector Flint's fingers twitched toward his revolver, but Poirot gave a minute shake of his head. "Non, mon ami, let us not be hasty." His voice was barely above a whisper, but there was steel in it. The gaunt man who had revealed himself as the unwilling thief of the clock swallowed hard. His face was pale, and his hands trembled as he clutched at the wooden chair beside him for support. "It's him!" he breathed. "The fox!" Flint's jaw tightened. "Or one of his men." Poirot's sharp eyes flicked to the door. The inn was old, the hinges weak. Whoever was outside could hear them just as well as they could hear him. A direct confrontation here, in this dimly lit inn, could prove disastrous. No, Poirot would not allow their enemy to dictate the terms. He moved swiftly, stepping away from the door, motioning for Flint and the man to do the same. With careful fingers, he grasped the candle on the table and blew it out. The room plunged into near darkness, with only the faint moonlight filtering through the grimy window. Then came the soft, unmistakable sound of the doorknob turning. Flint stiffened, his revolver now firmly in his grip. Though he held his fire, the door edged open with excruciating slowness. A shadow stretched across the threshold. Then silence. Poirot, standing just out of view, waited. Seconds passed, stretching into eternity. Then, with surprising swiftness, a figure lunged through the doorway. Flint spun toward him, but before he could react, Poirot moved with almost effortless grace. A well-placed foot sent the intruder stumbling forward, and Poirot seized the opportunity, twisting his coat and shoving him to the floor. Flint was upon him a moment later, revolver pressed to the back of his head. "Well, well," Flint growled. "Seems we caught ourselves a rat." The man let out a low curse in French, then stilled. Poirot bent down, studying him in the dim light. He was wiry, dressed in a dark coat and cap, his face thin and angular. Not the fox himself, but a messenger, a foot soldier in the game. Poirot reached down and deftly removed a small gleaming object from the man's coat pocket. He held it up to the faint light. A silver pocket watch, its cover engraved with an intricate fox's head. "Ah," Poirot murmured, "a most interesting emblem." The man on the floor said nothing, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Flint wasn't so patient. He pressed the revolver harder against the man's back. "Who sent you?" A dry chuckle. "You already know." Flint's expression darkened. "The fox." The man didn't confirm it, but his silence spoke volumes. Poirot studied him for a long moment. "And what was your purpose here, mon ami?" His voice was almost gentle, but the sharpness beneath it was unmistakable. The man gave a slow smirk. "To take back what belongs to my employer." His gaze flickered toward the broken clock, still lying on the table. "And to ensure that you don't live long enough to meddle further." Flint made an angry sound and hauled the man up by the collar. "You'd better start talking. Who is the fox? What's he after?" The man only chuckled again, though there was tension in his body now. "It's too late," he murmured. "He knows." Poirot raised a single eyebrow. "Knows what, precisely?" The man only smiled. "That you're already in check." There was a pause. Then a gunshot shattered the silence. Flint spun, dragging the captive with him, but the shot hadn't come from the room. It had come from the street below. Poirot moved swiftly to the window, peering through the narrow gap in the curtains. The street outside was mostly empty, save for a figure in the distance, disappearing into the mist. Another man lay sprawled on the cobblestones, unmoving. Poirot's voice was grave. "A message, I believe." Flint muttered a curse and turned back to their prisoner. "You know who did that?" The man gave a slow, knowing smile. "Consider it a warning." Poirot exhaled through his nose. "A warning, yes, but also a sign of desperation." Flint frowned. "Desperation?" Poirot gestured toward the shattered clock. "We have something the fox wants very badly, and now he grows reckless." He turned to the captive, his expression unreadable. "But what I wish to know is this. What was so important about these documents that they were hidden inside a timepiece?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the man's face. Flint's patience ran out. "Enough of this," snapped. "You're coming with us." The man smirked. "Am I?" Poirot caught the flicker of movement an instant before it happened. The man's fingers dipped into his coat, retrieving a small, gleaming knife. With startling speed, he twisted from Flint's grip and lashed out. Flint jerked back just in time to avoid a fatal wound, but the blade sliced through his coat. Poirot reacted at once. With a precise motion, he grasped the man's wrist and twisted. There was a sharp cry of pain, and the knife clattered to the floor. Flint, recovering, struck him hard across the jaw, sending him sprawling. This time, when he was hauled up again, there was no more fight in him. Poirot straightened his cuffs, unruffled. "Ah, mon ami, it is most unwise to attempt violence in close quarters with Hercule Poirot." Flint, panting slightly, tightened his grip. "You're lucky you're still breathing." The man spat blood onto the floor. "Not for long." Poirot met his gaze, his eyes colder now. "No, monsieur, that is a fate reserved for you." A knock at the door broke the moment. Poirot and Flint exchanged a glance before Flint cautiously. moved to open it. A uniformed constable stood there, looking grim. "Sir," he addressed Flint, "there's been another incident. Another body found, near the clockmaker's shop." Poirot's lips pressed together. Ah, Flint's jaw tightened. "And who is it this time?" The constable hesitated. "We believe it may be Percival Belmont." A heavy silence fell over the room. Poirot inhaled deeply, adjusting his cuffs with great care. "Well, then," he murmured, "it would seem our elusive fox has made his move." He turned back to their captive, who now looked slightly less smug. Poirot's voice, when he spoke, was soft but cutting. "You, monsieur, are a pawn in a larger game. And your king?" He leaned in. "He is running out of places to hide." The man's expression faltered. Poirot straightened, smoothing the lapels of his coat. "Come, mes amis, the game continues." And with that, he strode out, Flint following close behind. The hunt for the fox was far from over. Chapter 9. The fox unmasked. The air was thick with the scent of rain as Hercule Poirot and Inspector Flint stepped out onto the mist-laden streets of London. The city had settled into the hush of late night, but somewhere in the shadows danger lurked. The constable's grim announcement had set their course. Another body found near the clockmaker's shop, and if the constable's words were true, the victim was Percival Belmont himself. Flint's jaw was set as he fastened his coat against the damp air. If the fox has killed Belmont, that means he's tying up loose ends. Poirot adjusted his gloves, his expression unreadable. Or it means, mon ami, that Belmont was never the mastermind at all. Flint cast him a sidelong glance. "You still think Belmont was just another pawn?" Poirot sighed. "I think, mon cher Flint, that this game is more layered than even our fox anticipated." His gaze drifted to the constable, who was shifting uneasily from foot to foot. "Lead the way, if you please." The walk to the clockmaker's shop was tense, each step accompanied by the distant sounds of the city. Horse hooves clattering on wet cobblestones, the occasional cry of a night watchman, the rhythmic tolling of a distant church bell. Poirot walked with deliberate precision, his mind assembling the final pieces of the puzzle. By the time they reached the crime scene, a small crowd had gathered despite the late hour. The storefront of Belmont's shop was dimly lit, the sign above it swaying slightly in the cold wind. Two constables stood by the entrance, their faces grim. Inside, the scene was as precise as a watchmaker's craft. Belmont's body lay slumped, behind the counter, his head resting against an overturned wooden crate. A thin trickle of blood ran from his temple, staining the polished floorboards. His expression was one of frozen shock, as if he had glimpsed death in the very moment it came for him. Flint knelt beside the body. Shot at close range, clean, efficient. His fingers ran lightly along Belmont's coat. Nothing stolen. Poirot leaned in, his gaze flickering over the details. "Mais non, mon ami. Something has been taken." Flint frowned. "What?" Poirot extended a gloved finger toward Belmont's waistcoat pocket, which was slightly askew. Whatever was here. Perhaps a document, perhaps a key. It is now in the possession of his murderer. Flint swore under his breath. "Damn it! We're too late!" Poirot straightened, adjusting the lapels of his coat. "Not too late, mon cher Flint. Just in time." Flint's brow furrowed. In time for what? Poirot gestured toward the window, where the faintest trace of movement had caught his attention. For the trap to spring. Before Flint could respond, the constable at the door let out a startled cry. A figure had bolted from the alleyway beside the shop, vanishing into the shadows. Flint reacted instantly, drawing his revolver and sprinting after the fugitive. Poirot, in his usual measured way, followed at a brisk pace. His little grey cells had already told him the truth. This was not some random passer-by. This was there, Fox, the man who had orchestrated every move from the very beginning. Flint's heavy boots echoed against the pavement as he pursued the figure down the narrow street. The suspect was fast, slipping through the maze of alleyways like a spectre. But Poirot had already calculated the inevitable conclusion. There was only one direction left to run. They emerged into a dead-end courtyard, the sound of water dripping. From a broken gutter, the only noise in the thick silence. The fugitive skidded to a halt, glancing frantically around before realizing his mistake. Poirot stepped forward, his breath barely laboured. "Ah, Monsieur Fox," he said calmly. "It seems the chase is over." The figure turned slowly, and, for the first time, they saw him clearly, tall and lean, with sharp features and an unsettling smile. The fox, alias Reginald Kane, was as calculating as Poirot had anticipated. His fine coat was damp from the mist, his gloves pristine despite the night's events. He regarded Poirot and Flint with amusement rather than fear. "I must admit, I was hoping for a bit more of a challenge," he drawled. Flint's revolver was steady. "This is the end of the line, Kane. Hands where I can see them." Kane smirked. "Or what? You'll shoot me in cold blood? Hardly the style of a London inspector." Poirot stepped forward, his gaze unyielding. "Let us not play games, Monsieur Kane. You are caught. The time for clever quips is over." Kane's expression flickered just for a moment. Then he laughed, shaking his head. "I underestimated you, Poirot. That's my only regret." Poirot gave a small, knowing smile. "Oh no, monsieur. Your greatest regret is yet to come." Kane's gaze darkened. "And what would that be?" Poirot's voice was almost gentle. "That you believed yourself above the rules of the game." Silence stretched between them. Then, without warning, Kane moved. It was a desperate, final gambit, a hand darting inside his coat, the gleam of steel catching the moonlight. But Poirot had anticipated it. With a single swift movement, he stepped aside, and Flint fired a single warning shot. The bullet struck the ground near Kane's feet, halting him instantly. Kane let out a slow breath, his expression resigned. "So that's it, then," Poirot nodded. "Oui, that is it." The constables arrived moments later, hauling Kane into custody. Flint holstered his revolver, exhaling sharply. "Well, that was bloody close." Poirot simply smiled. "Ah, but, mon ami, the greatest criminals are often the most reckless in their final moments." Flint eyed him. "You knew he'd try something." Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "Of course." Flint let out a short laugh. "Remind me never to play cards with you." Poirot chuckled. "A wise decision, mon cher Flint." As Kane was led away, Poirot turned his attention to the small item the constables had retrieved from his coat. A folded piece of parchment, old and worn. Poirot's fingers traced the edge of the paper before he unfolded it carefully. As his eyes scanned the contents, his smile faded. Flint peered over his shoulder. "What is it?" Poirot's voice was quiet. "A map." Flint frowned. "A map to what?" Poirot's expression was unreadable. "To something worth killing for." And with that, the mystery deepened. Chapter 10. The Final Hour. The silence in Dedeu, the dimly lit drawing room of Whitehall Square, was thick with expectation. The suspects, now gathered for the final reckoning, shifted uneasily in their seats. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and old parchment, the remnants of a past era lingering as if unwilling to fade. At the centre of it all stood Hercule Poirot, immaculate as ever, his hands clasped neatly before him. His eyes, sharp and knowing, roamed over each face in turn, weighing their secrets. Inspector Flint stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, his revolver within reach should the need arise. And just beyond them, bound to a chair, but exuding an air of smug defiance, was Reginald Kane, the fox. "I must confess," Poirot began, his voice calm, "this has been a most fascinating case. A murder most cleverly disguised, a villain who fancied himself untouchable, and a secret that has lain buried for decades." Kane smirked. "Get on with it, Poirot. We all know I killed Belmont." Poirot's moustache twitched ever so slightly. "Ah, but did you, monsieur?" A murmur swept through the room. Even Flint turned, eyebrows raised. Kane's smirk faltered. "What are you playing at?" Poirot moved to the small table where he had arranged several items of evidence. Belmont's pocket watch, a faded ledger, the stolen map, and a single, gleaming bullet casing. "Let us consider the facts," Poirot said. Percival Belmont was found dead in his clockmaker's shop, a bullet wound in his temple. The crime appeared straightforward, too straightforward in fact. And yet, upon closer examination, something did not align. He gestured toward the pocket watch. "This, mon ami, is Belmont's watch. It was found broken at the scene, the time frozen at precisely 9:17. A convenient marker for the time of death, no?" Flint nodded. "That's what we assumed." Poirot held up a finger. "But assumptions, mon cher, are the enemy of truth. You see, the watch was not broken during the murder. It was broken earlier that day. I examined the mechanism myself. The gears had worn down over time and snapped from natural decay. Belmont, I suspect, had simply neglected to repair it." A hush fell over the room. "Then Belmont wasn't killed at 9:17? asked Flint. "No," Poirot confirmed. "He was killed closer to 10:30. Kane scoffed. "Irrelevant. I was still there." Poirot gave a knowing smile. "Ah, but were you, monsieur? You claim to have shot Belmont, yet you did not fire the fatal bullet." Kane's expression darkened. "What are you talking about?" Poirot lifted the single bullet casing. "This, monsieur, was found at the crime scene. A .32 caliber casing, a match for your revolver, oui. But there is one problem. Belmont was not killed with a .32 bullet." Flint's eyes widened. "Then what was he killed with?" "A .38 caliber round." Poirot tapped the table, meaning someone else fired the fatal shot after you had already left. Kane's cocky demeanour was beginning to crack. "That's ridiculous." Poirot turned to the rest of the assembled suspects. "Which brings us to the true killer." His gaze settled on a figure who had remained quiet throughout the proceedings. Madam Edith Harrington. A gasp rippled through the room. Lady Harrington, the elegant widow who had once been Belmont's closest confidant, lifted her chin. Her face was pale, but her composure remained intact. "You have no proof," she said evenly. "Ah, madame," Poirot said, "but I do." He held up the ledger found in Belmont's possession. "This book details payments made over the years. Large sums funneled discreetly to one recipient, you, Madame Harrington. Belmont had been paying you for silence. Silence about what?" "Chist." Woman's jaw clenched. Poirot continued. "About the truth. The truth that he had, in fact, discovered the whereabouts of the lost heirloom stolen decades ago from your late husband's estate. He kept this secret from you, knowing you would do anything to retrieve it." He pointed to the map. "This, madame, is what you killed for. The location of the lost Harrington treasure." Flint inhaled sharply. "That's what this was about. A bloody inheritance?" Poirot nodded. "A fortune lost and found again." Belmont had intended to use the knowledge as leverage, but he underestimated how far Lady Harrington would go to keep her past buried. And so, when she learned that Belmont had given the map to Kane, she knew her window was closing. She followed him to the shop, waited for Kane to leave, then struck. Lady Harrington's lips pressed into a thin line. "This is nonsense." Poirot smiled. "Ah, but your mistake, madame, was in the bullet. You used a revolver that did not belong to Kane. It was a weapon of finer craftsmanship, one belonging to a lady of your standing. Your late husband's pistol, which I imagine is still hidden within your home. Silence." Then Lady Harrington sighed, shoulders slumping. "I should have known better than to try and deceive you, Monsieur Poirot." Flint straightened. "So it's true?" She nodded. "Belmont was a greedy little man. He thought he could control me, dictate my life with his threats. I put an end to it," Flint signalled to the constables. "Lady Edith Harrington, you're under arrest for the murder of Percival Belmont." As the officers moved to take her away, she cast one last glance at Poirot. "Tell me, Monsieur Poirot, how did you truly know?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Because, madame, the truth is always a matter of psychology. You had the strongest motive of all." With that, she was led away, her footsteps fading into the night. Flint let out a breath. "Well, Poirot, you've done it again." Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "It is a simple thing, mon ami. A mind attuned to human nature will always see the truth." Flint shook his head. "And what about the fox?" Poirot turned to Kane, still restrained. "Ah, Monsieur Kane, you are guilty, oui, but not of murder. Your crimes, I believe, fall into the realm of theft and deception." Kane let out a dry chuckle. "Lucky me." Flint gestured to the officers. "Take him as well. We'll see what we can charge him with." As Kane was escorted out, Poirot turned to Flint with a small smile. "And so, my friend, the case of the silent clockmaker is closed." Flint chuckled. "Fancy a drink to celebrate?" Poirot lifted a hand. "Alas, no. The hour is late, and I believe I shall enjoy something far more rewarding." Flint arched a brow. "And what's that?" Poirot's eyes twinkled as he retrieved his perfectly aligned pocket watch. A cup of hot chocolate and a quiet evening of reflection. And with that, Hercule Poirot, ever meticulous, ever precise, departed into the London mist, his little grey cells content with yet another mystery, unravelled.